What's the creepiest thing you have experienced, but nobody believes you when you tell them? Once I got dropped off at like 1 in the morning in the shadiest bus stop in Tampa, even worse than a Greyhound station. Everyone in the stop got picked up one by one. My phone was dead, so I had to charge it to call an Uber. Suddenly I'm all alone in the only lit part of this open huge area in a bad part of town. I see a dude in the distance come towards me. Mind you, I called for an Uber like at most 2 minutes prior to seeing him come towards me. He takes like 2 to 3 more to get to me. Just as he sits next to me, my Uber pulls up and gets down from the car real fast to get my bags. The dude that sat down muttered, "You're real lucky." Boy. I got chills that lasted an entire day. My Uber driver looked at me angrily and didn't speak almost at all the entire ride and gave me a bad rating. I think I might have been robbed or even killed that night. And my Uber driver thinks he probably could have too. I'll never forget that moment. Never. Edit. Nobody believes me because it really sounds too perfect of timing to be true to some, so I never really tell anyone anymore. When I was little, I had fallen asleep while watching TV with my older brother on the left side of the couch. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up feeling uncomfortable for some reason. I opened my eyes and see that my mom had turned off the TV and had brought out a blanket and some pillows for me and my brother to use. I decided to use the advantage of being awake to hog said blanket and pillows. After tucking both blankets under my head, I then start tugging at the part of blanket covering the right side. At some point I realize that there is a weight holding down part of the blanket. With my eyes I follow the tension of the blanket and see at the end of the couch a grasshopper the size of one of my dad's steel toe boots. I try to scream, but I ended up being so petrified that I can't get the sound to come out. I then cover me and my brother with a blanket and start pawing and shaking my older brother, whom refuses to wake up. I begin to cry only to feel what I assume is the grasshopper crawling on top of the blanket and over my feet. I kick the blanket and roll onto the floor. At this point I'm out in the open and refusing to open my eyes. I reach my hand up onto the couch and rip down one of the pillows and hide underneath it. I catch my breath and tell myself it's a bad dream. Then I finally build enough confidence to open my eyes, and when I do, a weight lands directly in the middle of the pillow. With all the force I can muster, I chuck the pillow off myself and start screaming. This time the sound coming out. I felt like I was sitting there screaming for a solid 5 minutes before my parents came to the rescue. To this day, what happened that night is crystal clear in my memory. Lost time when I was a kid. Walking home from a neighbor one summer evening. Pre-cell phones, I wore a digital watch. Looked at it walking down the street. Then out of habit looked at it again while I was peeing after having walked inside my house. It was like 2.5 hours later. When I was 9, my mother, an active drug addict who didn't have custody of me, had kidnapped me from my dad. She exchanged me for drugs with my aunt and her 2 male roommates. I was locked in the house with them. Well, they got high and watched the Lorax. I probably watched the Lorax 20 plus times over 3 days until the police showed up. Years ago at me and my now partner's house in Chicago, I experienced something that I've never been able to explain. My partner was on a backpacking trip to South America and had been gone over a month and was still a couple months away from returning. We usually rented out the extra bedrooms in the house. But less than a month before he was leaving for the trip, the 2 roommates upstairs had moved out and we had decided to leave them empty while he was out of town instead of trying to find more roommates on short notice and also use the time to update the paint and pull the carpeting and refinish the wood floors underneath. Anyways, I had come home from work about 8 p.m. and decided I was going to take a shower and then get dressed up a little and go out to the bars to meet up some friends, as it was a Friday evening and I didn't have to work the next day. I take my shower, head into my bedroom, and start pulling on my clothes. My bedroom is on the garden level, which is like a walkout half basement common in Chicago bungalows, and my bed is up against the wall under the concrete steps that lead to the front door, which is a heavy wooden door and a very particular sounding Jimmy-proof deadbolt lock on it. I had been living there for 5 years and I was very familiar with the sounds of roommates coming and going through the door that was just above my bed. Anyways, I had just finished pulling on my underwear and stood up and was putting on my shirt, and I hear footsteps on the concrete stoop and then the extremely unmistakable sound of the deadbolt turning. I instantly freeze so I can hear better, thinking I'm out of my mind because I'm the only one living there at the moment, but I can definitely hear the door open and hear footsteps hit the wood floor in the entryway. So now I'm grabbing my aluminum softball bat I keep next to my bed and tiptoeing towards the stairs that go up to the main level, and I'm most definitely hearing footsteps crossing the same way right above me. As I get to the bottom of the stairs, I stop and I'm listening as hard as I can, and I hear definite footsteps heading right towards the top of the stairs. I decide fuck it and rush up the stairs in a second with my bat ready and nothing. There's nobody there. I turn on all the lights and check all the rooms and windows and doors, and everything is locked and bolted. If someone had actually been there, it would have been impossible for them to exit the house before I could catch them and lock the door behind them. The creepiest part was we had literally changed the locks a week before my partner left, and I know the only other key that could open the doors was hiking through South America at the time. Needless to say, I went and crashed with a friend after the bars that night and went home in the day the next day. This is long sorry. When I was younger, like 8 to 10 years old, I was at my dad's house for the weekend and was helping him paint my stepsister's bedroom well herself. My other stepsister and my stepmom were all out of town. Me and dad were a good hour or so into painting the room hot pink. We'd done a primer coat of paint and were going to take a break to go downstairs and get lunch before applying the actual color. I was sitting beside the ladder in the middle of the room playing my DS while my dad was putting the paint roller away. When he turned around to help me stand up, he noticed something on the wall. This thing looked like a red face. It had sharp features, pointed teeth, angled eyes, defined cheekbones, and a lower jaw that seemed like it was separated from the rest of the face. I remember my dad pointing it out and asking if I drew that. I said no, and we both started getting this really heavy, odd feeling. He took my hand and said, "Come on. Let's go to Tim Hortons for lunch instead, because originally we're just going to have macaroni and hot dogs." We went to Tim Hortons, and when we came back, the face was gone. That's what we didn't understand. Where did it go? The only other people that would have had access to the house was my stepfamily. But all three of them were visiting my stepmother's mother at her home in a town almost 2 hours away. The face was situated in the upper middle part of the wall beside the bedroom door. So it's not like one of the cats could have scrubbed against the wall and brushed it off. Also, how was the face red? Before that room was being painted pink. It was blue. Before it was blue. It was white. White was the original color of the wall the painters had applied to it when the house was new. My dad was the first person to ever live in that house. So it's not like someone else could have painted the wall red and then made it white again. Me and the cop that had me pulled over in rural central Missouri, kind of near the nuclear plant in Callaway Country, saw a UFO fly in a way that would not be survivable to a human due to the G-forces involved. Watching it was absolutely terrifying, and I thought the cop was going to pass out from shock. No one believes me when I tell this story and tell me it was probably a stealth bomber from Whiteman AFB. I have seen that aircraft fly in person more than a dozen times. It was not a B-2 Spirit. Pop was too shook to write the speeding ticket though, so that was nice. The night my father died in the hospital, my mother, my sister and I all woke up at the same time. We weren't in the same location. My sister was at uni. My mother at home and I was at boarding school. The doctors later confirmed that was the time he passed away. To this day I cannot remember is this is a dream or a memory, but I remember it clear as day. And my neighbor as a kid, we would all meet up in this abandoned lot and play kickball and whatever kids did back then. I went one day and no one was there. I sat for a while and an ice cream truck that knew we were always back there came through. As it looped, I got on my bike and was about to start heading home. Behind the ice cream truck there was a shadow of a human-like thing with huge pointy feet. It almost looked like it was skipping behind it, then just flipped and starting heading towards me. I freaked out and pedaled as fast as I could, and this thing chased after me all the way to my house. It is to this day one of my scariest memories, and I tear up when I tell the story. I've stopped telling it because everyone says I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. Sorry if it looks weird. I'm in Mobile. One night my wife and I dreamed the same dream. My parents are immigrants and they've taken me home every summer since I was born to my graduating college, as we have zero family in the US. My maternal family has a house that's been in our family for 100 plus years, which is where everyone lived. By the time I was born, very few people lived there, others had moved. Most had died, and when I was 15, my grandfather passed suddenly. Everyone was a mess. It was and is still one of the hardest things we've gone through as a family. He had this way of hugging you, where at the end he'd slap you on the back, but never knew his own strength, so I always ended up stumbling. The entire house was empty except for my grandma and I. My grandmother wasn't coping, my mom wasn't either, so as a result I'd become more of the take control and organized type. I also hadn't properly cried it out aside from a few seconds between mausoleums at the cemetery. My grandmother had asked me to make her some popcorn, so I ran off to the kitchen excited since she hadn't eaten in a while. I sat on the stool she had to sit on while cooking and waited for it to be done. About 2 seconds into being truly alone for the first time in a week, I promptly burst into tears. Like, Kim K. Ugly ass. Wailed, dying, stuttering sobs. I cannot emphasize this enough. The entire house was empty. My grandmother walks with a cane due to a disability from when she was younger and can be heard from a mile away. The doors to the kitchen creaked open and I startled. As I was wiping my face and sniffling, disoriented and a little worried my grandma would see me crying, I felt something slap me hard on the back. I stumbled forward and fell off my stool. I sat on the floor and freaked the fuck out because there was no way I was going to fall that way with my back against something. Immediately noped out of there and told my grandmother we didn't have popcorn now. Almost 15 years later, I look back on it a bit fondly. But 15-year-old me was creeped the fuck out. When I was around 13, I would sneak out in the middle of the night and take my mom's car and drive around. One night, as I was driving down a dark street, the car came to a sudden stop. It stopped so fast it threw my entire body forward. When I sat back up, the car was running and my foot was not on the brake. The car was not budging. I looked out the windshield and couldn't see anything. It was completely black. As I was trying to figure out what was going on, I started seeing intermittent lights as my eyes adjusted. I realized what I was seeing was a train flying by inches from the bumper of the car. I have no explanation and by all rights should have died that night. When I was 15, we had to put my childhood dog down. I was crushed. And I cried for weeks. On the third day after he died, after a particularly hard session of crying, I was sitting on the wooden window seat and eating a snack that he always used to go nuts for. After I finished, I crumpled up the bag and put my hands down to brace myself to stand up, and my hand landed in a small puddle of drool. I had no drinks nearby. Nothing that would have caused a puddle to appear. My mom didn't believe me, but I knew the Turner was still hanging around. When I was a teen, my mother used to take me to bingo all the time. It was our thing. One night we had a friend of mine with us, and we were driving home. Small towns and backroads in southeast Missouri. Back when cell phones were Nokia bricks and Google Maps didn't exist. We got lost about halfway home. As we often did, but my mom was a good navigator, so we weren't too concerned. My friend asked what time it was. As they had a curfew, I vividly remember answering 8:42 after glancing at my watch. And my mom saying 8:45 after looking at the clock on the dash. I think the numbers stuck with me because we then discussed how one of the two was off by a few minutes. Right after that conversation ended, my mother found a road to turn around on, so she pulled in, and we saw a metal arch with some cemetery name on it directly in front of us. Out of nowhere the car came to a stop and completely shut off. No dash lights. No nothing. And I swear the temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. She tried to start the car a couple times to no avail. Then paused to light a cigarette. As she often did when she needed a minute to think or regroup. Right as she flicked her lighter, we all saw a big flash of light. Much brighter than that Bic could have produced. And then the car started, despite the fact that her hands were nowhere near the ignition. I suddenly had an absolutely horrible headache. And when I expressed as much they said they did too. We didn't think anything of it. Other than it being a bit strange. And she began to back out of the cemetery road. About the time she got back on the main road, she looked down at the dash and said what the F. So we looked to see what was wrong. The clock now read 11:17. Mind you, no less than 5 minutes had passed. I said that it was weird. But maybe the car shutting off had messed with it. I glanced down at my watch to confirm. Only to find it now said 11:14. They were still 3 minutes apart. But nearly 2.5 hours had passed and we could not explain it. We kept talking it over and assumed we were just being paranoid. But when we got home, which was about 45 minutes from where we had gone to play bingo that night, it was indeed well after 11 p.m. I've never been able to explain it, and everybody assumes it's a made-up story, but I'll never forget it. And I'll never stop wondering where that time went. These fucking threads always show up overnight. Carry on though. When I was a child I was kicking some toy soccer ball in my room. After I kicked it for several times, the last one I tried I kicked it really hard. The ball disappeared and I was really surprised. I tried to search the room and suddenly after 5 minutes of looking the toy soccer ball, I sit in front of a door and near a wall. The ball suddenly appear and it has the sound effects of a ball hitting a wall when it appeared. I still remember it clearly and no one ever believed me when I tell it. I'm not even sure I believe me at this point, but I remember several times up until about age 7 that I woke up floating above my bed, and when I'd wake up and feel the sensation that I was in the air or that my blankets were draped over me, I'd fall back into my bed. Child me had a fear of monsters, and at the time I was sure the monster under my bed must have kicked my mattress and tossed me in the air. It's still a vivid memory in my mind, but I don't have any explanation.